Klein, step back, three for the tie. Oh!
What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel here on YouTube. If you don't know me, my name is Rob Doster. I am a writer, I am a reporter, I am a blogger, and I am a podcaster for NBCSports.com. I cover college basketball. I think I have some interesting content for you today. I think we're going to have a fun video. We're going to talk a little bit about Purdue basketball and what has changed with them over the course of the last 4 years. They went from setting records for being the team that posted up the most in college basketball history 4 years ago to being someone that set a record for the most three-pointers attempted in one Big Ten season this past year. They haven't fallen off at all. I find it fascinating. I think you guys are going to find it interesting as well. Before we get into that, you know what I got to ask you. If you like this content, please smash that like button. If we can get to 100 likes on this video, I think it's a pretty reasonable request. And if you want to see more, as always, hit that subscribe button. There is a minimum number of subscribers that you need to be relevant on YouTube. I want you guys to help me get there. I think we can get to 1,000 pretty easily. If you tend to enjoy the written word more, check out NBCSports.com/college-basketball. And if you're a podcast person, you can find my podcast, the College Basketball Talk Podcast, hosted by NBC Sports, anywhere that podcasts are given away for absolutely free. Now, one of the things that we are going to be doing on this channel as we prepare for the 2019-2020 college basketball season is going through some of the most memorable moments from last year and talking about what they mean for this upcoming season. If you'll remember, last week we talked about Virginia winning the national title and what they did to change their offense based off of what happened against UMBC and why that put them in a position to win it all. Today, we're going to talk about something that we might have touched on a little bit in that video. Now, I'm fully aware that this is an example of recency bias at its finest, but I think it's really, really hard to find one weekend of NCAA Tournament basketball that was more of a heart-wrenching roller coaster ride than what we saw from Purdue in the second weekend of last year's NCAA Tournament. Let's start with the Sweet 16 game that they played against Tennessee. If you recall, Purdue jumped out to a big lead early on in the first half. They were up by as many as 17 points in the second half before they ended up blowing that lead completely. Ryan Klein made 4 straight threes in the final 5 minutes, some of which were absolutely ridiculous, like this and like this. And that put Purdue in a position where Carson Edwards could draw a controversial but probably correct foul on the three-pointer with just 1.7 seconds left on the clock. He made 2 of those 3 free throws. He forced overtime. Purdue went on to win. They advanced to the Elite Eight. They had a chance to make it to their first Final Four in 39 years when they took on Virginia. Now, you'll remember that game as the Carson Edwards game. It was one of the most unbelievable, impressive, thrilling individual performances that I can ever remember seeing on a college basketball court. Carson Edwards scored 24 of his 42 points in the second half. He had a 13-minute stretch in the second half where he made 6 three-pointers, some of them from as much as 30 feet, all of them against 2 of the best defenders in all of college basketball, in Kihei Clark and specifically DeAndre Hunter. We talked about how good he was last week on that Virginia video. Carson Edwards went nuts. 42 points, carried Purdue back from a double-digit second half deficit, and it was enough to actually put them in a position where if Kihei Clark doesn't make this play and doesn't find Mamadi Diakite for this shot.
Into the hands of Clark. Got a chance to win it here. Up the front. Here's Diakite for the win.
Purdue is making it to the Final Four. As it stands, Virginia ended up pulling away in overtime. Purdue did not make it to the Final Four, and my fingernails and voice were gone by the end of that second game that weekend. And I only had, a couple of bets on the line. And for the record, I took Tennessee in the Sweet 16 and I took Purdue in the Elite Eight, and I lost both of those bets. Thank you very much. Beyond just my degeneracy, I think both of these games, had one major thing in common. One Purdue player went absolutely nuts in the second half down the stretch, making a whole bunch of threes in a row and putting the Boilermakers in a position where they can get to an overtime period. Against Tennessee, it was Ryan Klein. He scored 22 of his 27 points in the second half. He made 4 straight threes in the span of about 5 minutes that allowed Purdue to keep pace with a Tennessee team that was absolutely rolling. And the wild part about that is that Klein didn't even end up being the leading scorer for Purdue in that game. It was Carson Edwards. He had 29 points. Those 29 points came in between back-to-back 42-point outbursts, one against Villanova in the second round, and as we mentioned, one against Virginia in the Elite Eight. In total, Carson Edwards got up 61 threes in 4 NCAA tournament games last season. Klein was able to get up 34 threes of his own, and those two numbers serve as a pretty fair summation for what the Purdue basketball offense was during the 2018-19 season. Matt Painter's club shot 977 threes over the course of 36 games last year. Since 2010, only 4 high major teams have shot more threes in a single season than Purdue did last year. Villanova did it in each of the last 2 years, the year they won the national title and this past season. Auburn did it last year when they made it to the Final Four, and Michigan did it in 2017-2018 when they made it to the national title game season. So Purdue was one of maybe the 4 most high-volume three-point shooting teams at the high major level that we have seen in the last decade. They also set a record for the most three-pointers that were shot during one Big Ten season, taking 501 threes this past year in Big Ten play. Edwards led the Big Ten in three-pointers attempted. Ryan Klein finished second in the conference in three-pointers attempted. Combined, those two shot 327 threes last year, which was more than Minnesota's entire team took. And that's fascinating to me because just 4 years ago, as recently as 2015-2016, Purdue finished 12th in the Big Ten three-pointers attempted. That year was the first of a 4-year stretch where they have arguably been the best program in the Big Ten. And during that 2015-16 season, almost a quarter of Purdue's offense, 24.8% of Purdue's offense came via post-ups. Now, to put that number into context, since the 2007-2008 season, which is as far back as I actually trust Synergy's logs to be accurate, there have been just 3 high major teams that have gotten more than 21% of their offense via the post-up during one season. Purdue during the 2015-16 season, Purdue during the 2016-17 season, and Stanford in 2008 when they had Brooke Lopez and Robin Lopez. But there's more to it than just that makes that number fascinating to me. In 2018-2019, this past season, just 7.4% of Purdue's offense came via the post-up. In 2011-2012, Robbie Hummel's senior season, just 2.9% of their offense came via the post-up. So in the span of 7 years, Matt Painter went from running an offense that had Robbie Hummel, a 6'8" small forward, playing the 5, to running an offense that featured Caleb Swanigan, A.J. Hammonds, and Isaac Haas in his front court, to one that rode Carson Edwards and Ryan Klein going full YOLO to within one Mamadi Diakite 8-footer of making it to the Final Four. That change is not something that is normal, and it should tell you all you need to know about the guy that's running things in West Lafayette. Now, let me tell you a quick story. I spoke with Robbie Hummel while I was reporting out the story that I wrote for this. I'll add the link in the description. And he told me a story that he remembers like it was yesterday. Purdue is fresh off of blowing a 19-point second half lead on the road in Cincinnati against then number 11 Xavier. That was the team that had Tu Holloway. That was the team that ended up getting in the brawl with Cincinnati. All those guys. Hummel is with the rest of his team and the coaching staff in the film room. They're watching the edits, and when you blow a 19-point lead, there's going to be a lot of stuff that went wrong that the coaching staff is going to be able to highlight during that film session. Hummel finished with 17 points in that game, but it took him 21 shots to get there, and there was specifically one shot that he remembers that he knew the coaching staff was not going to be a big fan of. With more than 20 seconds left on the shot clock, Hummel waves off not one, but 2 Purdue guards that are trying to get the team into their motion offense. He crosses over once, he crosses over twice, he puts the ball between his legs, rhythm dribble with his left hand, pull up 3, air ball. And I mean, the shot wasn't even close. When it came up on the screen in the film room, Hummel knew exactly what was about to come. Robbie, Matt said, without a hint of sarcasm in his voice, that's the worst fucking shot in the history of college basketball. And Painter was right. You know, the announcers on the broadcast pointed it out. Hummel knew it at the time. His teammates knew it at the time. The guys on the bench, the coaching staff, everybody knew that was a terrible shot. And when I spoke with him, he said it was, this is a quote, just a horrific possession and shot. At least he was able to laugh about it with the benefit of hindsight. I'm telling you that story because I think it's funny, right? But it also serves to drive home a point that I'm trying to make about Painter and this Purdue program. And it's one that I kept hearing from people that played for him, that have scouted against him, that have coached against him, that have watched him play. What he might do best as a coach is identify the specific strengths and ideal skill sets that the guys on his roster have and figure out a way to put his players in a position where they can take advantage of those specific set of skills. And not only that, he is able to convince them that this is the way that they need to play to be their best. And when they are their best, that Purdue will be their best. Put another way, he gets the buy-in that allows Purdue to win as many basketball games as they do. And I talked with him about it, and he told me everybody looks at, quote, talent. But talent is overrated if someone is not going to play within the limits of what he can and cannot do. The more guys embrace that, the more productive they can be. And so the story that I told you, I think it's the perfect example of this. You know, Robbie Hummel as a senior was an All-American. He was an All-American when he was a junior. He was a guy that ended up being a second-round pick in the NBA draft in 2012. You know, he averaged 16 points as a senior. He averaged 15.7 points as a junior. You know, he was one of the best players in America. He was one of the best players to ever walk into Mackey Arena wearing a Purdue uniform. He was a damn good college basketball player. And that shot, the shot that Matt Painter called the worst fucking shot in the history of basketball, it looks an awful lot like some of these shots from Carson Edwards and from Ryan Klein, doesn't it? If you talk to people that played for Painter, that have played for Purdue, that have that know him, they'll tell you that he is very much a guy that is a believer in coaching up confidence. To put it another way, he doesn't want players on his team to be thinking about what they're doing, about plays that they're making, about shots that they're taking when they are in the course of a game. If you're open and it's a shot that you can make, shoot it. Don't be worried about missing. You're not going to come out because you missed a shot that is a good shot, because you missed a shot that we want you to take. Sometimes that happens. Fire it up with confidence, let it fly, and if you miss, we'll figure it out on the next possession. That's what he wants his guys to think like. That's how he wants them to play. But it also comes with the caveat. He needs his guys to understand specifically what is a good shot for them, and that a good shot for them may be different than what a good shot is for somebody else on the team. Edwards was the absolute best at what he did in the country last year. He's going to spend a decade in the NBA because of how good he is at scoring points. It's just really that simple. You know, he might be 6 foot tall, but he is elite when it comes to making tough, contested, deep threes. He is elite when it comes to being a guy that can go out and get you a bucket. As Painter put it, he's got the juice. And likewise, Klein was one of the best three-point shooters in the Big Ten last season. He was one of the best three-point shooters in the country. There are not many guys that can make the shots that he was able to make. And Hummel, as good as he was, is not a guy that you want going one-on-one 35 feet from the rim. That's just not his game. And frankly, through shots like that, it's a really good way to blow a 19-point lead on the road. Which brings me back to the point that I made at the beginning of this video. In 2015-2016, Purdue had one of the biggest front lines that you will ever see at any level of basketball. They started A.J. Hammonds, who was a 7-footer that weighed 250 pounds. They started Caleb Swanigan, who was 6'9", and at that point probably about 260 to 270 pounds. When one of those two didn't start, it was Isaac Haas, 7'2", 280 pounds, looks like Mr. Incredible. Just massive, massive human beings. The year after that, when Hammonds graduated, it was Haas and Swanigan that started basically every game. In 2018, when Haas was a senior, Purdue did play a little bit differently. They ended up having 4 guards around the one big guy inside, but they still ran everything through the post. They still wanted to make sure that they got Haas a touch. They didn't end up with more than 21% of their offense coming from post-ups, but they still had 16% of their offense coming from post-ups, which was only good for 6th in all of college basketball, all 353 teams. Now, the interesting thing about the way that Purdue does things is that they have an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator. Greg Gary, who is now the head coach at Mercer, was Purdue's offensive coordinator at the time, and I spoke with him for this. And he basically said, look, we had great big guys. We got to get the ball to our best players. When you have NBA players, You get the ball to your NBA players. Pretty simple, right? He also said that the guards would get mad because they had to throw it in so many times, which, as someone that liked to fire up a three in my day, I completely empathize with. But back to the point, getting the ball inside, what it does is it forces the defense to make a decision. Are we going to guard Isaac Haas one-on-one? Are we going to double team him? Who are we going to double team him off of? Because there's nobody in college basketball that is going to be able to guard Isaac Haas or Caleb Swanigan or AJ Hammond's one-on-one without getting into foul trouble. It's very, very difficult to stop a guy that's that big when you have offensive sets that allow him to get position like this. The trouble was, if you double teamed, you're probably going to end up getting burned by having an elite three-point shooter get a wide open look. Every year during those 4 years, during those teams where Purdue was the best post-up team in all of college basketball, they finished in at least the 80th percentile from three-point shooting. In 2017-18, the year that it was just Haas and 4 guys around him, they shot 42% from three. That was second nationally. They had the second most efficient offense in the country. The only team that season that was more efficient than them over the course of the year was Villanova, the team that won the national title with the most efficient offense that we've seen in the KenPom era. So you're forced to make a choice. Isaac Haas shoots 62% from the floor. He shoots 76% from the foul line. He averaged per 40 minutes drawing 7 fouls per game, an unfathomable number. So are you going to double team him? Because if you do, then these are the guys that are going to be open for a three when Purdue moves the ball back on the perimeter. Elite three-point shooters everywhere you look on the floor. But everything changed this past season. Matt Harms is now Purdue's starting center. He's 7'3". He is not the same kind of post presence as his predecessors. Trevion Williams got a couple starts at the 5. And while I do think he's going to end up having a very, very, very good career in a Purdue uniform, he was a freshman that was as big as Caleb Swanigan was, as out of shape as Caleb Swanigan was, and not nearly as talented as Caleb Swanigan was when Biggie walked in that door as a freshman. So the staff had to figure out something different. Now this is where the X's and O's kind of come into play. And I think it's important to note here, Purdue probably has, if not the biggest playbook, one of the biggest playbooks in all of college basketball. When I spoke to Painter, he estimated that they probably had roughly 50 or so plays diagrammed, but every single one of those plays, they can initiate that offense or that set based off of 3 or 4 different ways they can get into each of these roughly 50 plays. There are also multiple different options that come with each one of these plays. Put another way, they have counters to their counters that counter what they were already countering. So not only do you have 50 different plays or so, they can get into them with 3 or 4 different looks, and each of these plays have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 options. So do that math, and there are a lot of things that you need to know if you are going to be playing basketball for Purdue. What Klein told me was at the start of the year, they get a stapled booklet every year that has all the plays, all the ways to get into it, all the options off of those sets, all the specific actions that they're looking to get their players into. Over the course of the offseason, what they'll do is they'll play pickup in the mornings. Klein said it was like 6 a.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They'll go and play for an hour and a half, and they'll kind of work through some of these plays and work through some of these offenses, and that's the way that they kind of taught each other what to do. As he put it, if you don't know the plays, you don't play. Edwards used to joke with the coaching staff that the toughest class that he took at Purdue was their playbook. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that so much of what Purdue does on the offensive end of the floor, so much of the success that they have there comes down to the intelligence of their players, the execution of their players, and the deception of the coaching staff being able to disguise what they want to run. That's where they have an edge. Now, from 2015 to 2017, that edge was just pounding the ball inside as much as possible, playing through the post players, allowing them to go and do work, and then if someone doubled on them or if there wasn't enough space in the paint, then kicking it out and letting some of these talented players they have, some of these good shooters they have, make people pay for sending 3 or 4 defenders into the paint. In 2017, 2018, the edge was forcing a defense to make a decision. Are you going to double team Isaac Haas? Or are you going to let him go one-on-one? It was that simple. If you didn't double team him, you're dead in the post. If you did double team him, it's kick out, swing, swing, wide open 3. But they didn't have that option in the paint this past season. But what they did have was 3 things that the coaching staff had determined they could find a way to build through. And it's 3 specific skill sets that 3 players had. Let's start with Carson Edwards. He is one of the fastest people that you are going to see on a basketball court. He is an absolute nightmare to chase around screens. Not only because he's so fast, but because he's low, he can get around corners. And not only is he compact and able to maneuver around all of these screens, but he also can catch and shoot after running at full speed, especially when he's running to his left. The Purdue staff knew they had that. They also knew that they had Harms, who, while he's not the kind of big man that's going to bury somebody in the post like Haas or Hammonds or Biggie Swanigan did, but he's mobile, he's skilled, he's really good in dribble handoff actions, he can handle the ball a little bit on the perimeter, and he just has a knack for understanding when he can slip a screen, when he can dive for the rim, and how he can get an easy bucket that way. And the third thing they knew was that they had Ryan Klein. Now, the thing about Klein is he's really good at running off of screens going to his right, and the reason for that is because he has that kind of weird release on his shot where he shoots the ball from a little bit behind his head, from a little bit on the right side of his body. He has a natural fade going that way. So when you're chasing him, it's very difficult to contest that. He's 6'5". You're not going to get up there. He can get that shot off even if you have your hand up. But he's also proven himself over the years to be a really good passer and a really good decision maker in those actions. He is a better passer than he probably got credit for. And so the result, kind of obvious, right? You get an offense that is Edwards running off of screens, Klein running off of screens, Harms being the dribble handoff man, Harms being the screener, Harms slipping to the rim. And this is what it looked like. When I spoke to Gary about this, basically what he said was we had to have all of this movement. We had to have all of these guys running around because we didn't have that post guy that could be the fulcrum of our offense that you could just throw the ball into. You know, when you have that post player, things can get kind of stagnant. When you don't have that post player, you need to have actions going on both sides of the floor to be able to create space and to occupy weak side defenders, especially if you're in a situation where one of those players on the weak side is not a shooter. Now imagine trying to guard this. Imagine chasing Carson Edwards off of a triple screen. Imagine being a center 22 feet away from the rim, trying to decide whether or not you should blitz this dribble handoff or if you should protect against Harms diving to the rim. There's not really an easy answer there. And now imagine doing all of that, knowing that one word can change what Purdue is looking for in a specific play, even if what they are running is exactly the same as what they ran on the last possession. A different end result based off of the same start, that's the kind of thing that is a nightmare to guard. Here's an example of that. 10 times against Tennessee in the Sweet 16, Purdue ran this action that featured Ryan Klein running off of a Matt Harms dribble handoff that effectively acted as a double pin down in the middle of the floor. Look at how many different ways they have to get into that action and how many different results they have stemming from that action. Now, for the Purdue coaching staff, the frustrating part, if there is one, is that you're probably going back to the drawing board now. Edwards is gone. Klein is gone. That's a huge chunk of their offense, more than 50% of their offense. And what's left is, well, it's different. But it's also probably more familiar than I think people are going to realize. I think you could make the argument that of Purdue's 5 best players next season, 4 of them are going to end up being big guys. You have Matt Harms, who everybody on that staff is telling me is probably better in the post than he's gotten credit for over the years. You also have Trevion Williams, who is a big-bodied low-post bruiser that is going to be able to get a lot of chances and a lot of touches in the paint and make something happen with them. Then you have Evan Boudreaux. He's a little bit more of a stretch 4, but he's still a big guy. Aaron Wheeler, another guy. He's a little bit stretchy. He's a little bit more effective in transition, but again, he's a front court player. Then their 5th best player is probably Nojel Eastern, who is someone that in his career, in 2 seasons, is 3 for 13 from 3. He is not a shooter. So what are you going to do? Bringing in Jahad Proctor from High Point is going to help, but he's a grad transfer. He's a lead guard. He's not someone that was necessarily known as a great shooter when he was playing at High Point. And it'll help. And guards like Sasha Stefanovic and Eric Hunter did have moments as freshmen last season, but it's still going to be something new. It's still going to be something different, and it's still going to be a Purdue coaching staff that has to figure out, again, how they can get the best out of their players when they are losing so much during the offseason. As Painter put it to me, there's a really big sophomore jump with talented guys, and we had 4 freshmen come off the bench that will now be sophomores. I think all 4 of them will have good years, and Nojel and Matt will be able to expand what they're doing. But I think the one thing we have to make sure is we don't try to make anyone Carson or anyone Caleb. Allow guys to be the best version of themselves and play through that. And I don't know if there is a better coach or a better coaching staff than Matt Painter and Purdue at figuring out what the best version of themselves is. Thank you guys for tuning into another video. Please smash that subscribe button. Please smash that like button. And I hope we will see you guys again next week.